I'm stalling for time just to let a few more people in. Once it's 7:05, we will start, whatever. So whoever's late has got a minute to arrive, and then I will mute myself and hand you over, first of all, to Peter, who will welcome Sarah. I'm thinking that we're probably good for people, so I will mute myself. I will look out for your questions on the side, and I will butt in as and when appropriate, but otherwise, welcome both.
Thanks, Jo.
Okay, thanks very much, Jo, and lovely to see so many people here on this very exciting night, because if we had the shop open, the bar would be there, the wine bottles would be open, the glasses would be laid out, and everybody would be prepared for the launch of this wonderful book. As it is, of course, we are still bezoomed tonight, and but we hope that's not going to stop us discovering a little bit about this book, which is launching tomorrow. Many of you have ordered it with us, and many of you, I think, have actually managed to sneak a copy out of the shop before its official publication date. But we do realise that very few people will have got too far with it because it's not officially out until tomorrow. So we will be very conscious of no spoilers tonight, I think, Sarah, is the thing. So I'll say welcome to Sarah and echo what Jo said, really. Sarah is absolutely one of Redline Books' absolute favouriteest authors. Over many years, she's been such a good friend and writer. And we've been so pleased and proud to launch several of her books in the shop. And this is no exception. And in particular, The Starlings of Bucharest, not Budapest, as I believe some of our advance information said. In fact, it's getting a bit of a reputation. It's been called The Starlings of Bucharest, The Darlings of Budapest, and all sorts of things. But the official title, Starlings of Bucharest. And so welcome, Sarah. Would you first of all just like to tell us what the Starlings of Bucharest, just kind of set the scene a bit, and maybe how it relates to the walls of Leninsky Prospect from a couple of years back? And then if you'd like to, it'd be lovely to hear you just read a short piece.
Yeah. Well, the walls of Leninsky Prospect, it had Martha exploring Moscow, and Martha was the wife of a diplomat at the British Embassy in Moscow. So she had a very particular way of being able to access the city, and she also had a really solid support network. So whatever decisions she made, she was doing them in the knowledge that there were people who were looking out for her. So I wanted to have another look at Moscow from a different perspective. So I've got Ted in this novel, and Ted is from Harwich, so he's a local boy, and he's trying to make his way as a journalist, but he can't get a job as a journalist because this was around the time when journalism started to need a degree in order to access work, and he's had to leave school early, and so he's struggling to get where he wants to be. But he has stumbled into this job as a film reviewer, and is a magazine in southeast London which specialises in films from behind the Iron Curtain. So he's sent off to Bucharest to interview a Romanian film director. And so I'm just going to read a little bit from his visit to Bucharest. So this scene, he's just interviewed a film director. He thinks he's probably interviewed a film director. He's not entirely sure whether it is actually the person he was supposed to have interviewed, because translation and who has the power of translation is very important in this novel. So his guide is Vasily, and he's sitting by a lake with Vasily and two policemen, and he's not quite sure how he's got there, but that's where he's ended up. I noticed that the men had stopped talking, then heard a second car pulling up at the church. Two more men got out, another older policeman, and a man in a baggy shirt and trousers, as if he bought them and then shrunk. I looked around. Everyone was watching them approach, apart from the younger policeman sitting with us. He was watching me. I sat up straight. Vasily stood up and welcomed the baggy man with a pat on the shoulder. After saluting the group, the policeman walked back to the car. Vasily turned to me. This is Marku. I nodded to Marku, unsure of why I needed to know his name and no one else's. Hello. Vasily then talked to the younger officer and gestured for Marku to sit between me and himself. Marku slowly lowered himself to his knees. Ted, Vasily said, Marku needs your help. What? He repeated himself, pointing. Marku needs, then pointing at me, your help. I looked at Marku, his eyes directed towards the ground, his hands clasped together as he knelt. He could have been praying. I understood the words. I don't understand how I can help him. Vasily opened his hands. I haven't explained yet. He said something which sounded brusque to the young policeman, who nodded and shrugged. I am going to translate as Marku explains his situation. Yes? Yes.
Thank you. And I think that highlights quite a few things about the book and the style of writing as well. And I love some of your descriptions. Like the trousers looked like he'd bought them and then shrunk. I think you've got a real kind of life to the way you describe characters and places. And talking of places, what kind of brought you to Bucharest for this time around?
It was a conversation I had with one of the mums at school in the days where I still had to do the school pickup. I was very friendly with this woman who's from Romania, and we normally just had very short conversations, but this time we were waiting for something. We had a much longer conversation, and I asked about how she'd come over to Essex, and she said that she'd been a gymnast. Not only she'd been a gymnast, she'd been in the national team. And then she joined the circus, and the circus had come over to Britain. So I'm like, you ran away with the circus? And she was like, no, I just came over with the circus. And it was kind of a point where I was like, oh, it wasn't just Moscow that was behind the Iron Curtain. There was all these other major cities who had all of their own kind of relationships with Moscow and with the West. And so I started looking into Bucharest just because she'd made me interested in what was going on in other places behind the Iron Curtain.
I discovered recently that Bucharest is the enormous government building in Bucharest is the heaviest building in the world. What an odd thing. So you've moved from your first 2 or 3 novels to these 2, which link, and they're kind of 1.5 feet purely placed in the kind of spy novel tradition.
Yeah.
But they're doing something kind of a bit different as well. And I hope during the course of our conversation, we kind of explore a bit about that. And to start off with, I mean, in writing a spy novel, did you set out to think spy novel, Graham Greene, John le Carré, I'm writing in this kind of spy novel tradition, or how did it kind of come about?
When I decided I wanted to write a spy novel, I was reading a book by Joseph Kennon. So it was a very different kind of spy novel to the MI5 or the MI6 agent. It was a much more low-key kind of spy novel, all about their personal relationships with people, and that was what I was more interested in exploring, how 2 people could look each other in the eye and lie to each other and mislead each other, and the effect that has at a very, very personal level. So it wasn't really about raiding file cabinets or kind of listening in at the doorways. It was about 2 people and how far they would go to push each other to get the information that they wanted.
So you had an interest really in kind of human relationships in there, as much as, because you talked about that book you read being low key, and on the outside, this book is low key because there's no explosions in it. There's no big car. Oh, this is like a spoiler, isn't it? So I better stop. But the intensity of the book, and it does have intensity, and the page turning quality of it, which it also has, is built out of quite small pieces. And you touched on one, is how much we reveal to each other, isn't it, as in our conversations, and who can we trust? And um, Ted, as he moves to Bucharest, is surrounded by people who are spying on him, spying on each other, and he doesn't know the motives really behind, whether it's the woman behind the travel desk in the hotel, or Vasily, his guide. What is their real motive? So, are you trying to discover something about kind of human integrity or human authenticity in relationships, or?
Well, I became quite sidetracked by reading about the Stasi, and just looking at how an entire country could be dominated by this group of people who are forcing other people to watch each other, and then once you've agreed to do that, you belong to them forever. And there was a couple of books of people who'd found their Stasi files and gone through them, and the amount of just inane, mundane information that they'd accumulated just because they could accumulate it. So you have the people who are watching other people, but they don't necessarily want to. So it's all about people pressuring each other, and just to have that information, and the idea of information as power. So I don't. I think. I think probably what I'm saying is that no one can ever really know anyone else properly, but you can know all the facts. You can you can have access to all the facts that you like, but you won't necessarily know what they will do under pressure. And that is why I particularly liked Ted meeting some of the same people as Martha did, and having a completely different reaction to them. Because he comes from a different place and he has different priorities, and so when he meets Martha's husband, he can't see him in the same way as Martha does.
And so maybe that's a good time to say a little bit more about Ted, because he's quite an unusual hero or protagonist for a spy novel. When we think of the big classic spy novel tradition, we think of those Cambridge students who were kind of signed up to MI5 or signed up to the KGB or Soviet spies in their student days, and came from often quite aristocratic or well-off backgrounds. Ted's very much son of a Harwich fisherman, very much working class lad, trying to, quite very naive, trying to find his way in the world. And you might think, in a way, unlikely material for a spy, yet he's attracting attention.
Yes. So Martha's very much in that Cambridge tradition, except she's the wrong gender. Otherwise, she would have made. They might have approached her while she was at university. But the STARLINGS of Bucharest has got accreditation from John Lawton on the front, and he has written about working class people within the kind of spy genre. But it is quite unusual. But I'd written about Martha, and she comes from a place of privilege, and I wanted to see what it would be like if you didn't have that privilege, to go to Moscow and see what the same kind of pressures and influences would do to you. Because Martha has reasons to reject Britain, because as a woman she's not going to get where she wants, and then Ted has the same kind of problems with society in the 70s as well. So it's looking about people who aren't necessarily happy with the way Britain is, and seeing whether those disappointments could or should be exploited. But he has a lot of things going for him. He's very different to Martha, but he wants to learn, and he wants to get on in life. So anytime that a character wants something, you know that you can put a bit of pressure on them. But I really enjoyed writing his parents as well, because they turned out to be completely different kind of people to what I thought they were going to be. So I liked it when he saw them.
And yeah. So I jotted down something which I think came out of one of the reports, which we can talk about in just a moment. And it's exactly what you said, talking about there can be a use to anybody. They don't have to be in a positions of high power to be potentially ultimately useful, maybe many years' time. And there's a phrase that said, and I think it came from the Moscow report later in the book, it said any idiot can become a useful one. I thought that was quite an intriguing comment. But yeah, I think maybe this is a good time to talk a little bit about one aspect of this book, which is quite unusual, and it is that we follow the characters through a few episodes, and then we are privileged. We have privileged access to what the Romanian Ministry of the Interior report on those same events is written up finally in their archives, and that is absolutely fascinating, because you see the same events through completely different eyes and through completely different kind of filters as well. And and this isn't a spoiler. For instance, Ted stops outside the embassy, the English embassy in Bucharest, and he notices a discarded cigarette packet, and so he picks it up because he thinks, well, this is a little bit of England. We don't want rubbish here. And later on in the report from the Romanian Ministry of the Interior, the subject was observed to pick up a cigarette packet, Old Kent cigarette packet. We believe this is probably a dead letter drop. And so there was just this kind of reading of all sorts of implications into the most simplest of actions. And what gave you the idea to filter in those reports from possibly the KGB later in the book in Moscow, but the Romanian Ministry of the Interior to start with?
Well, I was reading books about people going through their Stasi files. So Catherine Verdery, she was actually, she had files in Romania, so they're from the Securitate. And they went through her day with exactly this kind of warped perspective, trying to read meaning into everything that she did. And she calls her book My Life as a Spy, because they were reading her as a spy even though she wasn't a spy. And then I read a novel called Dossier 51 by Gilles Perrault. It's a French novel, and the entire novel is written in dossiers written by some kind of unnamed security service. So they look at this man who's a French diplomat. I think he's in Denmark, and they just analyze his life. They get to know the people around him. They write about them, and so you build up this whole picture of his life, just because they're trying to find a way to put pressure on him to make him work for them. And so this idea of, because in spy novels we really want to hear from the spies because they're the people least like us, maybe. So it just felt to me really interesting to kind of, because I wanted a second voice, like in the Wolves of Leninsky Prospect. My second voice is the folk tales, the fairy tales, which give you a different kind of view of what's going on. So in this novel, it was the spy reports, just to kind of switch the perspective a little, so you don't necessarily, well, you're reminded that Ted's point of view is just his point of view as well, that other people have different perspectives.
And I note in your writing, you seem very at ease with kind of describing from the outside events as they take place in very kind of simple ways, and the details of them, and then leaving the reader to kind of draw out the implications. Do you think, I mean, as a writer, you observe, don't you? Do you think writers would make good spies? Would you make a good spy?
Well, I've been asked this actually, and I immediately thought of this time that I was in the woods walking the dog and I was collecting chestnuts. And this woman came up to me in long flowing clothes with a very strong Eastern European accent and asked me what my name was. And I told her. So I would be a terrible spy. I wish I was more spy like. I wish I could just make things up and tell lies just for the sake of it. But I don't think I'd be any good. But I would love to get all the information on people. So just a couple of months ago, I released a memoir where I had investigated people in a court case that I'd been on. So I used the same techniques that I used when writing the novels to look at real people and their real lives. So that's as close as I've got. But what struck me about the film critics and the traveling around was that would be a perfect job for a spy, but it would also make you a very obvious spy because MI6 would be interested in anyone traveling regularly behind the Iron Curtain. And then if he ever did become a journalist, I started to read about Robert Maxwell, and I read through all Robert Maxwell's life and whether he was maybe a spy for the Soviet Union. And so there was a lot of discussion about journalism and spying and things linking them very much in the 70s and maybe into the 80s as well. And then it became a much more professional kind of job, and all of that faded away a little bit.
And from the interactions with your characters in Romania and later in Moscow, you get a sense of the layering of the intelligence networks in a sense, because we're dealing here with bottom level of it really. And
Yeah.
Vasil, who is Ted's minder when he first turns up and throughout his stay in Bucharest, I didn't realize quite at first, but he's really, really young. He's like only about 20 or very early 20s and
Yeah.
of very little experience. And so it made me think, and do you think people that young would be asked to do those kind of jobs of looking after and keeping an eye on and spying on visitors to the country?
Positions like that, it tends to come down to corruption a lot of the time. So if his father was in the right kind of position, he would easily get that kind of contact. But he would also have to have excellent school records and all of the kind of the boxes ticked. But I'm not sure that as people get older, they probably just see more problems with their behaviour. So I saw it more likely that it would be a young person given that kind of responsibility before they could develop a list of problems that would get them thrown out.
And I found it interesting too that not only was Vasil appointed to kind of accompany Ted around and report back on him, there was also somebody reporting back on Vasil, because amongst those reports that are interleaved with the episodes, there's comments about how Vasil manages his job and his role, and it's not always doesn't always get 10 out of 10, shall we say. And for instance, when he asked Ted whether when he leaves Bucharest he could possibly give him a present of his pair of trousers, that's very much frowned on, as it reflects badly on the ability of the country to dress its citizens. And those kind of things, where did you kind of find the material to introduce those kind of ideas?
It was partly from Dossier 51. So you get all of this paperwork that is accrued on this man who's codenamed 51, and it reveals all of the bickering and the arguments going on between the people in the office and their superiors. And so you do get a sense of all this layering, and no matter how high up anyone is, there will be someone above them making notes on what they're doing as well. So in a culture of surveillance, everyone is just looking at everyone else all the time. Um, the idea of Vasily trying to collect objects from the people visiting was just to show how very naive he was about it, how it all worked, that he could have these contact with Westerners and benefit from it himself. So it's that's where he falls down, really, is his greed.
Just to let everybody know that do use the chat facility if you want to pop in any questions, not necessarily about the new book, but Sarah's earlier books, or any questions that you'd like Sarah to answer during the course of this evening. One or two people have picked up on what you were just talking about, the Summer of Spying, Sarah, which was this series of episodes from your participation as a jury member last year in a court case. And absolutely right, a lot of the kind of styling of the way you write in the Bucharest is quite similar to this. And is that because that was what you kind of plugged yourself into as a writer, or is the kind of theme of spying and trying to explore motive in a crime quite similar to the spying situation?
I think I'm just incredibly nosy, and so I just try to find out everything that I can, and then I transform the best bits into stories. So with the Jura case, I just became very lucky that I hit on a couple of things online, and which gave me a hook into how I could explore that as a narrative, because it wasn't really about the court case itself, it was about everything that fed into the court case. And then I had the conversation with the man who was on trial afterwards, which was fascinating. So it was very much a similar kind of thing to the Starlings of Bucharest. It was, you had two people saying completely opposite things, and you just had to go, which one do you believe, and which one do you want to kind of put your money on? And with the Starlings of Bucharest, it's a similar kind of thing. You've got Ted, and you have people around him, and he's not sure who he should be trusting, and we're not sure for a lot of the time who he should be trusting, although we may like some of them more than others. I love Ursula. I really like Ursula, and I love Ted. But it's just about putting yourself in that situation and just kind of wondering, what would you do? I think I'd be a terrible mess. Because I would need to be in a situation like Martha, where I knew people that I could rely on. But Ted is much braver in a way, going out there as a individual.
And talking about Ted, there's a question coming in. Was it kind of different writing a male lead, or was it more a challenge, or to kind of, you talked about stepping into the shoes of someone in a very different situation, 1970s Cold War, a foreign country. As a writer, is it a stretch to kind of get into that, the mind and mindset of that character?
He just turned up as a man, and this is the only male lead I've had in a novel. So I did think quite hard about whether it was something that I could do well. But I have written short stories from a male perspective before, so it's not like I've never written from a man's perspective. But he just turned up and kind of fully formed in a way. and I don't really have that much in common with Martha, apart from being a woman. So it wasn't harder than Martha. It was just different, really.
And quite a few questions coming in, so I'll try and plug into some of those, as well as some other things that I did want to cover here. What point did you realise that the Wolves of Leninsky Prospect would be a series? Was it a conception right from the start, or could you not let that kind of style and theme go?
No, I thought about it as an individual book until I was finishing it up, and then I was on strike for a week, and so I had a little bit of time to think about it as I was just finishing up before I sent it to Moira, who's my editor at Sandstone, and I realised that there was more that I could do with this world, and because I realised that. Looking at a particular place and time, it's already full of stories, and I could do almost anything and go anywhere with it, so I found it really exciting. And then Moira agreed, luckily, so I could move on to Starlings. Um, but the third novel in the series will probably be focused on Minsk because that's where I've been. But the reason I went to Minsk is that I had a nagging doubt that I've been writing about Moscow all this time and I'd never been to Moscow, which seemed to be an issue for some people. But 1970s Moscow is long gone, and if I went to Moscow now, I'd have to be stripping out all the new bits. It's a very, very different place and quite scary. And someone said to my husband, "Oh, she should go to Minsk because Minsk hasn't changed at all since the 50s. There's been no money, there's been no regeneration. It's exactly the same." And it was perfect, and I felt exactly at home as I would in Moscow in 1973. I could find anywhere, and
Sure.
I love Minsk in exactly the same way.
Well, I think that's. I can remember actually doing an event with you in, I think,
Was it
Brentwood
Brentwood?
Library,
Yeah, yeah.
and you talking about Moscow, and there was somebody in the audience. Do you remember this? Who
Yeah.
had lived in Moscow in a very, very similar apartment block to where your heroine was staying,
Yeah.
and she could not believe that you hadn't lived there, or at least visited there. So that's kind of a big stamp of approval on your ability to kind of, from afar, kind of
Yes.
immerse yourself in a place. Somebody's intrigued. Catherine here is intrigued about the film magazine. And was there such a magazine featuring films from directors behind the Iron Curtain at that time? Was it based on anything in particular?
Yes, it was, but I can't remember the name of it now. But it did. I did use it to read their coverage of. There were so many film festivals in the 70s, and so I used it to read their coverage of the different festivals and how they reviewed films, and was it? It might have been Sound and Screen. I can't remember, but there were a couple that did a very similar thing.
And somebody else mentioning Summer of Spying. Could you tell us a little bit about the Summer of Spying, just on a bit of a tangent, because it is very unusual idea in a way, and I think it works brilliantly well in terms of insight into the whole of our legal process, trial process, and I loved your kind of diversions about kind of architecture and everything that you experience, kind of you fill in the history and background of. How did it actually happen?
The whole architecture angle came straight from Minsk because I've been reading a book about architecture in Minsk. So I was very, very conscious at the time of how buildings are designed to affect people and how they want people to feel. And the Chelmsford Court building is really ugly. So I just kind of became interested in how it ended up so unattractive. But the court case itself, there was a man who broke into a house where two men were having dinner with one of their sisters. It was a couple, and a man broke into their house with a massive kitchen knife in one hand and a big baseball bat in the other, and attacked the two men. And so there were 5 charges, 2 of which he'd already pled guilty to. But we had to decide whether he should get 10 years for aggravated burglary. So it's very, very specific charge with very, very specific requirements that he had to have intended to hurt them. So one of the men was injured and one wasn't, and that's where it started.
And in a way, I suppose the role of the jury is kind of very similar to what spies are trying to do. They're trying to observe to start with, assess the kind of the truth or otherwise, and maybe then guess at motivations as well. So I can see a very kind of strong link between you know, your involvement in that court case and then writing about it as these novels. Somebody, David Walton here, asking about languages. How much of a sense of the languages do you have when writing, you know, these foreign lands and environments, particularly kind of Cyrillic languages so different from ours? Does that affect how you approach this kind of writing?
I write whatever rubbish comes into my head, which is translated by Google Translate, and then I give it to my friend Bika, who is fluent in 5 languages, including Russian, and she sorts it all out for me. But I would not feel confident writing anything in Russian if I didn't have someone like Bika to help me, because I know absolutely nothing about it. She's offered to teach me Russian, but I think that would make me look even more like a spy. So I'm happy for her to carry on doing my Russian for me.
And as a reader, I found this book a real kind of page turner. And I was thinking about that afterwards, because mostly page turning is often associated with kind of widescreen action, if you like.
Yeah.
But we don't have a lot of widescreen action here, as we've kind of talked about it. It's mostly kind of detail and small everyday stuff. I mean, when Ted leaves his room, somebody else pops in, of course, and every day and examines exactly what's happened in that room and itemizes everything that's in his suitcase, everything that's in the rubbish bin, and tries to extrapolate from that, you know, what his real purpose is in the country. I've lost my thread here.
It's about languages.
Yeah, so we were language. Yes, so it's not widescreen action, but it's still got a real intensity, and that intensity, I think, is kind of born out of our slow discovery of what's motivating people. As a writer, how I would imagine it's kind of a bit of a challenge to introduce real kind of suspense and keep you on the edge of your seat to find out what happens when you are dealing with mostly fairly low-key stuff. And I think you achieved this brilliantly, and I'd be intrigued to know what the trick is.
I'm not sure I know what the trick is. You just want to put someone in a difficult situation and then make it much, much more difficult. And so every decision that they made just makes things harder, until they get to a point where they have a binary choice. It's either go that way or go that way. So that's what I'm trying to do, just kind of cut off their choices, really, until we see what they're really made of. It's very cool.
Harry Royal, who should know, suggests that the magazine might be Sight and Sound.
Yes. Thank you, Harry.
Thank you, Harry. So, and Ted's our kind of working class hero. Did you have investigation of kind of class in your mind through this book, or did he just kind of turn out to be the man he is?
I wanted it to be someone who was very different to Martha in as many ways as possible. So I did consciously think about class, because she comes from a group of people who are very knowledgeable about GCHQ and all of that kind of thing, and they know people who work in embassies, and so I wanted someone who wouldn't really have any idea about that kind of world. And thinking about class led me to the idea of researching how people did get into journalism. And I realized that this was the point where it turned from being something you could enter as an amateur to something that you had to have qualifications in. So, I mean, looking at newspapers now, it seems to be a very, very critical time for papers being written by normal people to being written by graduates, which is a huge change, really. So that was something that I was very, very conscious that I wanted to look at. And the whole thing about, I think I've had libraries in all of my books, actually. Libraries are really, really important for that, just that access to information, which is so in danger now. But that is something that has come up again and again in different ways in my novels.
And so Ted is his stay in Bucharest is kind of beset with problems, from never seemingly quite being able to actually interview the film director that his sole reason for being there really is, and his flights mysteriously being suddenly unavailable, forcing him to stay longer and longer. But he finally does get back to London, and it's quite an interesting picture of London in the 70s. I'm talking about the 70s. Why the 1970s? Why not spying in the 90s or in just post-war? What is it about the 70s that gripped you?
I found it very hard to choose a year for the Wolves of Leninsky Prospect, because I thought that the 30s was interesting, the 50s was interesting, the 70s were interesting. I didn't want to go past the point of communism, so I wasn't going to go past 90s. But I had to just decide by choosing which year that David Bowie went to Moscow. So David Bowie went to Moscow in 1973, which is why I chose 1973. And then once I had a year, it made it much easier to kind of focus everything into that year, because just the Wikipedia kind of listing of the events of that year, it gives you such a good idea about what was going on. And then I just wanted to leave it a couple of years until Ted got there. So he's in Moscow in 1975. And so you just see what's happening in Moscow in 1975. And there's an international film festival, and that is why he became a film critic.
And so finally he does get home from Bucharest, and his next mission is to the International Film Festival in Moscow, where things develop a lot further.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us just a little bit about the people he meets in Moscow and what's happening there, without giving anything away? Challenge for you there.
Well, first of all, in London, he's living in my old flat in Plumstead Common, which is why.
Your old flat?
Yeah. He's only got one room, but that's where one of the many places I lived in Plumstead Common. So when he arrives in Moscow, he thinks he's booked in at one hotel, and then he finds out he's actually been booked in somewhere else. But he meets a man who happens to be going to the International Film Festival, and then this man introduces him to Ursula, who's also going to be at the film festival. And so he's never quite sure if he is accidentally meeting these people or if they've kind of been set up, because when he gets off the plane from Bucharest, he meets a man at the airport who he also met on the way going out. who's just checking in with him, seeing if he's okay. And then he also sees him when he's on the plane to Moscow. And so there's people just keep turning up and recurring, and he's not quite sure why these people are kind of interested in him, why they're coming to meet him and talking to him, and maybe they just like him. And so it's just that sense of uncertainty, because he's very lacking in self-confidence, and he has no idea what he's in for.
And you're right, yeah, there seems like there's almost nobody that you can take at face value out of all the people that he meets. Everybody's got an agenda, and everybody's trying to either influence him or protect him or use him in some sort of way that's beyond his ken. I don't know, what is that saying something about life? Should we all be a bit wary about all the people around us? Because there's kind of levels to people, aren't there? And we show a front and a face to people, but that might not be what's happening behind the scenes.
I think if we think we're going to be useful to people, then maybe we should guard our information quite carefully. But we live in a society where we are surveilled all the time, and our information is up for grabs at every single moment. So I'm not sure we actually have learned any of the rules of the Cold War, and maybe we should be a little bit more suspicious. The kind of the fashion for having Ring doorbells and CCTV. I'm not sure how different it is really to being under surveillance by the KGB. Information is power, and we do need to be really, really conscious of that.
So in a way, the change has been from even the small stuff was observed in those days by the Stasi or the KGB or the Romanian spies on all their visitors, and enormous dossiers kept. Nowadays, it's all on CCTV, but within the artificial intelligence search algorithms can sift through vast amounts of that information and pull out what somebody wants. So we're probably more looked at now than we ever were.
And we're just giving the information away. Yeah. It is really.
Carry on.
No, I find it fascinating, the whole kind of traffic in information, the market for it, and who owns it and who wants it. I think it's a really, really interesting area.
And along with spies and along with surveillance comes secrets, doesn't it?
Yes.
And secrets have always kind of been an important part in thinking back through your earlier novels as well. Secrets that come back to revisit and haunt from many years earlier, family secrets, all sorts of things. Has that always been kind of part of what you bring to your writing? Secrets in terms of people and places and history?
I think it is. I think I'm just always interested in finding out what people tick, and you think you're going to find that out through the secrets, but you don't necessarily want everyone to know your secrets. And so it's a kind of a power play of who owns the information again. But who owns the kind of the right to know everyone's secrets is kind of, I think maybe the moral of all my novels is not to have any secrets, because it gives people leverage and it gives people power over you. So to get them out, and then you're free.
Well, interesting. There was an interesting piece in the paper this morning about identity theft, and it appears that identity theft is not breaking the law. It might be breaking the law if you use it then to fraudulently obtain money from somebody, but to take somebody else's identity and, for instance, take out a mortgage in their name is not breaking the law, which seems very, very strange.
There's another novel there, I think.
Anybody with any more questions that's been listening tonight? I'm just having a little peek back through the chat, but do pitch in
Can
with
I just
any
say,
other. Yeah.
Jerry has just mentioned about going to Kaliningrad because it's in C.J. Schuler's Along the Amber Route, and that was a great book, really, really interesting. Just to looking about the route that the Amber travelled along to get to St. Petersburg. That was a really important part of my research.
And so you said there would be a third book.
Yeah.
Following on from here, is that, what stage are you at with that? Is that on the way yet, or is that?
It was kind of underway, and then there was the pandemic, and then it was kind of underway again, and then I wrote about the jury case, and now I'm a bit busy marking, so it's not complete by any means, but I'm sure it will be one day.
We've probably got another 5 minutes or so. If anybody wants to pitch in with any questions, if we've missed any, please pitch them in again, because I'm trying to scroll back. No, I think we've covered all of those.
Okay, just a final one's come in there at the end. Has the summer of spying given you any appetite for writing a novel based around a court case? And then Liz has said, tell us about your next book. So perhaps they could tie in.
Writing about the court case made me quite anxious in a few ways. So I don't think I'll be writing any more about real people. I was really, really pleased that the man on trial did agree to talk to me. But I wouldn't be quite so relaxed if the two other people turned up at any book reading or any event. So writing about real people does have its drawbacks. The next book goes back to Martha. Martha, no Harry. Martha will be back as the main character, because I miss her, and so that will mean more fairy tales and seeing what she's up to. You do get a little tiny bit of Martha in Starlings, but she's back properly in book 3.
Okay, so can you just tell us the Summer of Spying? Is it available, and is it going to be available in one package or just as an ebook download now?
It is an ebook, but there are 6 copies at Red Lion.
One's taken. One is taken.
5 copies, and I will be making up to 10 more, and then that will be it.
So get in quickly, because these are really special things, and they were always exclusive editions, only available in Colchester. And so I heartily recommend an insight into a modern court case, brilliantly written and with all sorts of digressions or interesting details about history, architecture, society at the moment, and observations about the world we're living in, the 21st century. Is there anything else, Sarah, that you think everybody really needs to know about tonight before we start to wind up?
No, I just want to say thank you so much for all your support. This is my 4th novel released with the help of Red Lion Books, and please, if you are interested in buying the novel, do consider getting it from Red Lion because they have been brilliant.
Well, we've got plenty of copies. It was a cracking good read, an unusual read. It brings real originality, I think, to the spy novel genre, and is kind of carving a real niche for herself in this kind of style of writing, because it combines page-turning suspense with great historical kind of background and place and character. And so heartily recommending it. We got plenty of copies. The launch of that book is now, so it is now open to the world. Publication date is officially tomorrow, and so I think it's time Sarah can break open a bottle of wine, and everybody at home maybe would like to raise a glass to Sarah and this book and wish it well. I hope it picks up brilliant reviews and establishes itself in the bestseller list. Let's hope.
Thank you.
So thanks very much, Sarah, for tonight. And then let's hope for the next book we'll be all in person back in the shop.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
And thanks everybody for coming along tonight, and hope to see you. Our doors are open again. Our next book event online is with Liz Trinell on, Joe, the 12th of May, is it?
12th of May is our next big exciting thing. We've done all April, we're going to do May. It's the 12th of May. There's my phone. It's 12th of May.
12th of May. So
and you're all invited. You're all invited.
Yeah, watch out for our newsletters, which will tell you exactly how to make sure that you're involved in that. And so thanks lastly again to Sarah. Thanks to Joe for letting everybody in and keeping an eye on everything on the Zoom. And see you back in the shop soon. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye, everybody, and thank you.
Thank you. Actually, does everyone want to unmute and we'll do a big, loud thank you for Sarah? So if you could all unmute yourself, it's quite a nice, fun, noisy thing to do. You see, I knew you were all there. Wonderful. Lovely. Well, John Le Carre's sad demise, we've definitely got space for Sarah now. So we'll see you all as her career blossoms. See you later. We're going to end the meeting now.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye.
Bye.